Peace and welcome to the culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Farajii. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of the conversation. Folks, we got a lot to talk about. Let's give you an update on the killing of 14-year-old Cyrus Carmack-Belton. We'll talk to you about what has happened over these past 24 hours. Plus, let's talk about should race still be included in college admissions. We're going to be checking in with Culture Crew member Brother Shanadu, who is our diversity, equity, inclusion specialist, to give his take on the big conversation and happening in the country and in the Supreme Court. And then later, let's talk about the case for representation. How important is it? I want to share with you what one psychologist say about the idea, and then, of course, get your take. And, of course, here's another big story. A black woman's wig was ripped off her head in the middle of a New York City street. Now she's calling, she may be looking to take legal actions against a white male who committed the violation. So we'll have those conversations and a whole lot more. Stay with us. It's happening on today's edition of The Culture here on the Black Star Network. Let's go. Folks, welcome to the culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Farajii. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining us to be a part of the conversation. We got a lot to talk about, so let's jump right into it, folks. First and foremost, we want to give you an update on that very, very disturbing case of the 14-year-old who was fatally shot in South Carolina, Cyrus Carmack-Belton. He was shot by an Asian store owner by the name of Mr. Chow. Mr. Chow has officially been taken into custody. And more so than that, folks, the word has been that Mr. Chow has been charged with first degree. He has been charged in the shooting of Cyrus. And it looks like it's going to be a charge of murder for this fatal shooting of this 14-year-old. Now, according to the Sheriff's Department, I want to share with you what they had to say about this case as they gave a news conference. Take a look at this, folks. It was said that he did not, and if we want to go back, let's go back to the other quote. The sheriff said that he did not shoplift anything, talking about Cyrus Carmack-Belton. He said, we have no evidence that he stole anything whatsoever. That's not something you shoot anybody over, much less a 14-year-old. Also, the Sheriff's Department said that we are confident that this was done in a manner that will now classify as a homicide. This was not an accidental shooting by any means. This was a very intentional shooting. And unfortunately, Cyrus Carmack-Belton lost his life. Let me go to my Culture Crew member, Brother Shanadu Wakorfor, who is a DEI specialist. He's also an activist and has been working in the space of policeman brutality to other social justice issues related to race. My brother Shanadu, good to talk to you. How you feeling this afternoon?
I've seen better days, but I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, bro, I feel you. Let's talk about this case. Cyrus Carmack-Belton, 14 years old. Keenan, when we get a chance, just put the picture of little brother Cyrus back up so folks don't lose sight of who he is and what he looked like. 14-year-old, he was run down by a store owner and his son, and unfortunately was shot in the back. The Sheriff's Department has always maintained a stance that this was not an accident, that this was a very intentional shooting. And they also maintain the fact that Cyrus did not commit any crime based on the evidence of what they have gathered. So what do we walk away with dealing with this as we look at the larger conversation about race and guns in America, Brother Shanadu?
I mean, it is another telltale of our society and the ills of this American society we all live in, this experiment that we are all living in. It's that idea of why, when you see a Black body, does it inculcate fear within you? And even when it creates that fear, why is the immediate response killing or hurt or deep affliction of your own insecurity onto that body? This continues to be a question that I ask because you see it sometimes with the police when they see a Black kid and all of a sudden feel like they're seeing a Black man or better yet, a black kid, and all of a sudden identify that kid that is black as a thug, a gangster, a ne'er-do-well, so on and so forth. And it goes to show, when people like to say that, racism is in the past, it might be in the past, but its stains and its stench permeates in the future and the present. And this is an example of that.
Absolutely. It's a huge example, I think, Brother Sinedu, of the simple fact that we are in this space in this country. Do you think, and I had to, when we were talking about this case yesterday, do you think this is going to inflame the tensions between the Asian community and black folks in this country? Or is this a single isolated incident that will just be seen as that, a single isolated incident?
So theoretically, even if it is isolated, it can begin to ruffle the feathers of a bigger nuance that we already know that's there. We've seen that the Asian community has been a huge part of business in the black community with convenience stores, so on and so forth. And we've experienced treatment from the Asian community that is not quite so favorable. So whether this is isolated or not, again, a decision made more than a mistake made more than one is a decision. Okay. And although some of these mistakes have not led to the death, we in all black urban centers have seen variations of this, justified or not. And it will bring back some questioning. It might start with some tension, but where it would need to end is with the Asian community, the one that when they were getting killed in 2020, and it was Stop Asian Hate, AAPI hate is wrong, and there was legislation based on what happened in Atlanta, Georgia. We would want to see some of that same energy from them same people denouncing what this man has done.
Absolutely. Let me go to some of the crew members are saying. Jesse James, you posted this. You said, I go to this store all the time. The owners, Asian men, have been getting harassed, threatened, robbed, and daily theft. Asian man lost his mind. He has had enough. This has zero to do with race. My God. Do you think that this has zero to do with race? Because it's hard to say that it has zero. And I'm not, Jesse, again, I don't live in South Carolina. That you're describing a situation that I'm not, privy to. But you mean to tell me that if a man runs after a child, that in the course of that pursuit, even while the child is running, even while the child has fallen down and gets back up, in the course of that pursuit, you don't think that man should have questioned his own judgment, his own decisions to shoot a child in the back? Like, did it call for all of that? And that's one of the things that the Richland County sheriffs were saying. At the end of the day, you shot somebody in the back. They were no longer a threat. So I know we got 30 seconds before we take our first pause, but what's your take on what Jesse was making, on the point that Jesse was making?
I always ask this question. How many black bodies does it take for us to say, is it about race or is it not? When it is any other person, any other community, it could take one death or one threat of death, and it's a big deal. Whether we want to view race or not, it is always playing a psychological game in our society. That's what this country has been built upon, and that's an issue that continues to be reoccurring. And if you don't want to believe me, let's go and check statistics. People lie, but numbers don't. It's always about race.
It's always about race. Folks, we got to take a quick pause. When we come forward, we'll continue and get some more thoughts from you, as it has been announced, folks, that Mr. Child, the store owner in the killing of Cyrus Carmack-Belton, has been charged with murder, with homicide, and it's intentional. And at this point, folks, we're wondering, is this case over with, or will there be some other reverberations? What's your take on the discussion? Join us in a conversation. We're streaming live on YouTube right now, as well as Black Star Network and Amazon News. So stay with us. We got a lot to cover here on the first hour of the culture right here on the Black Star Network.
Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig? When you talk about blackness and what happens in Black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in Black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Checks and money orders go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.
Folks, welcome back to the show. We've been talking about the latest update with the killing of 14-year-old Cyrus Carmack-Belton. This is the young brother who was shot and killed while running out of a convenience store because in South Carolina, where the owner of the convenience store allegedly thought that Cyrus, little brother Cyrus, was shoplifting. He ran after Cyrus, him and his son, and gunned him down, shooting him in the back in the middle of an apartment complex nearby the store. And now Mr. Child, the store owner, has been charged with murder, and rightfully so and justifiably so. And now the conversation about the preservation of Black bodies and how much does Black lives truly matter continues to rage on in this country as we see another incident where some people are saying this is just a case of a man being harassed, while another group of folks are saying this is a case of racism now coming from the Asian American community. What's your take on this, folks? Join us in the discussion as we have this conversation with our DEI expert specialist, Brother Shinedu Wakwofo, who is an activist and advocate and one of our great culture crew members. Brother Shinedu, I'm wondering, as we have conversations about this level of violence against our people, I'm wondering, how do we have the conversation? You work in a space of diversity and equity and inclusion. So there are some people, they often kind of get on me a little bit, Brother Shinedu, because they say, well, you often talk about we when it talks about Latinos, or we kind of get grouped in, we kind of get brought into this larger group of those who are minorities of the country. How can we have a conversation like that? You know, in terms of understanding that even though this stuff is happening, that there are groups of people, Black folks, Latino folks, Asian folks, that are still subjected to what we're seeing happening in this country coming from white institutions and white policies and white supremacy in general. Can we, is it silly for us to group everybody together to say we? I'm trying to make sense of it all, bro. So I hope you understand what I'm asking here.
I do. It's you. If you group them together for a generality, it's fine. But you have to understand that there's details in the grouping. When you're on an airplane, if you're flying coach these days, you know there is basic economy, there is main cabin,
okay,
and then
there's Brother Shinedu. There we go.
Okay, you got me.
Yep, I got you.
Okay. You know, when I use an example, when you're flying on an airplane, for instance, you could be all in the coach section, right? But there's a basic economy, There's a regular economy and there's an economy plus. They all fall under coach, but they don't all have the same experience. I think it's important that when we talk about other marginalized groups, there are things, racism isn't really too picky. There are other things that divide us, which is just the ignorance that folks feel towards that marginalized groups. But it comes in stages. It is a collective we, sure, as a general sense of people who are marginalized. But then you have to also look at, there has been a group out of all of the groups that has been historically marginalized beyond measure, beyond history, beyond the mindset. And I think what happens is we try to compartmentalize, like, oh yeah, but then you've moved up this close and you moved up that close. And I think we also forget to see our own biases on how in our minds we justify the ignorance. Not after 9/11, anytime you see somebody who's Muslim, it doesn't even matter if they're from Afghanistan, Iraq, or Saudi Arabia. If anybody is Muslim, you're automatically jumping up and acting scared because you have now given reason to a falsehood based off of a generality. So I think it's high time people literally, it's not the job of Black people to now come and rope in the ignorance of others. It is high time that people look in the mirror and see how wicked they are being to fellow human beings. Because one way or another, everybody has been discriminated on one way or another. So I don't understand how it becomes easier as you move up in political capital, socioeconomic capital, that you now look down to what you believe to be the weakest link, or what society has said is the weakest link, to deliver so much pain and vitriol. It's high time people start questioning themselves.
And then when you do confront yourself, you might unearth some ugly realities about who you are and what you've been taught.
And that's another thing, because
you know what I'm saying? I think that's part of the fear that I think everyone faces, that, you know what, maybe I have been taught, or maybe I have been believing or thinking that incorrectly. You know what I mean? Maybe I am biased. Maybe I do carry some prejudices, right? Which is natural because we all have different human experiences. But it causes us to, and like you're saying, to confront yourself. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people in this country to do. It's so much easier to point the finger, to look outside of ourselves, right? To say somebody else is the problem, or this particular policy is the problem, or this institution is the problem. But the reality is, it's much more difficult for us to say, you know what, maybe I'm the problem.
There you have it. And Farajii, this is why, and this is why I tie it back to politics. This is why it is very important for our government, for governors, senators, legislators, to allow proper education of history. Because you would think with the Black presidents and the Black civil rights leaders and Black inventors, all these things that are very common knowledge to even your layperson, if you will, you would think that the kind of panopticon view that folks have towards African Americans will change. It's not, because there is, in my opinion, a misinformation campaign as it pertains to this certain group of people. It's an ignorant one that is put always. I'm going to go back to your previous question. It is put always. It's in the same way when you think about Hispanics that you think about hard work, as if every Hispanic is hardworking. Same way when you think about Asians, you think about incredibly intelligent, as if every Asian is incredibly intelligent. And in the same way, when folks think about African Americans, they think about danger and they think about disposability. These are major factors of lack of education, lack of information. It's what's not being allowed in school education, and more importantly, what is being pushed in narratives on that television.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very quickly before we take our next pause, my guy Willie Frazier checked in. Willie, you said, look, it hurt my heart when the rhetoric of Trump had derelict Black people attacking Asians, but to open your business in our community, to build wealth, deal with the good and the bad, or move. Yeah, I seen a lot of that type of sentiment yesterday as we were talking about this case. And as we close out on this part of the conversation, Brother Shanadu, there was a lot of that, people saying that we should not we should start a boycott, that we should make our presence known and try to be on the offensive in this relationship between blacks and Asians. Is that the strategy? And like Brother Willie said, that should this be the strategy from this point forward, especially when this situation like this, of this magnitude, happens?
I think it should be a two-pronged strategy. I think boycott is always important because I think it's important. Martin Luther King made it very clear. It's not, no one feels it until it feels them in their pocket. That happens to help man change. That happens to make man change faster than his own conscience. But what I also think is very important is kind of use it as an opportunity. I don't say this to be dismissive. I don't say this to be decisive. But no, I actually say this to be decisive but not divisive. This is an opportunity where we might want to consider patronizing ourselves so that when a young black boy walks into a business with other black employees, they'll understand that he's not a thug or a gangster, or there won't be a quick action to judge this person. So I don't see young Asians getting shot in grocery stores or in convenience stores. And it's not saying that we're doing this to teach them a lesson, but again, when this is all over, the family will sue and the family will win. The family will get millions of dollars, but two things would have happened that cannot be changed. A, that life will not be brought back, and two, the residual trauma on a plethora of black people will persist, which could lead to so much other strife outside of this realm. So I think it's very high time that we protect ourselves, not just in the way of arming yourselves, but protect yourselves financially, where we only patronize businesses with those who understand our cultural context.
Absolutely. Folks, we got to take a quick pause. When we come forward, let's continue to talk about race, but let's take it out of the streets of South Carolina into the colleges and the Supreme Court, as they're considering the larger conversation about race, using race as a metric for admissions into colleges. That's the big question we want to have for our big culture convo today. Should race stay included for college admissions? We continue the conversation with Brother Shanadu and, of course, with you. So stay with me. We got a lot to cover in the next portion of the culture here on the Black Star Network.
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol,
we're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear. Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
All right, crew, welcome back to The Culture here on the Black Star Network. We want to shift gears just a tad bit to continue the conversation about race, but just taking it out of the community side, now putting it into the institutional space, especially given the fact that the Supreme Court of the United States is now debating a case around the idea of affirmative action. This is something that the whole country is waiting on with bated breath to try to figure out which way the Supreme Court, which is a court that has mostly conservative voices and judges on there, which way that the court is going to move forward on this idea of allowing race to play a role in various admission processes, including the college admission process. And so we're waiting to hear from the Supreme Court. A new poll has shown that most U.S. adults say the court should allow colleges to consider race as part of the admission process. Take a look here, folks. This is from a May poll from the Associated Press North Center for Public Affairs Research, and they found that 63% say the Supreme Court should not block colleges from considering race or ethnicity in their admission system. The poll found little divide along political or racial lines, but those polled were mostly likely to say factors including grades and standardized test scores should be important, while 68% of adults said race and ethnicity should not be a significant factor. That's just one part of this conversation, and I wanted to bring it back to my brother Sinedu Okorafor, who is a diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist, to get us his take on what we're seeing with the Supreme Court and the fate of affirmative action in the college admission process. So, Brother Sinedu, this is interesting. If more than half of the American people are saying that race should be considered, then why is this being up for debate? Why are we saying this pushback, especially from the highest court in the land in some way, and from other folks that say that it should not be a consideration? What's your take with it, bro?
No one seeks innocence more than a guilty person. That's first. Listen, I think in an ideal society, it would be good to not consider race. But our society has not become as ideal as we would like to believe it due to years of discrimination against all different types of groups. To not consider that race as important is saying that for the 800-meter dash, that someone who's starting that race at the start line should be able to compete with somebody who's starting that race at 780 meters. And you see that there's a difference in that example between distance and time. They work in tandem. Distance meaning how far away are these groups from each other, but time, how long have these groups been able to be far away, generation and generation in and generation out. I think race should not be the only determinant for anybody getting into a school or what have you, but because our education system has been plagued and disenfranchised by racism, we need something for other human beings that just recently became human beings, according to the law. Something to give us opportunities to be able to move in some semblance of a tandem to be able to make it. And I say semblance because even using race as some type of determining factor to get us in does not even guarantee that we will ever be able to catch up, but it is a fighting chance. And I think to remove that is to yet again set us back decades, hundreds of years, and more importantly, to diminish the idea that race should not matter, which it should not matter, but it does because you created these institutions that are a lot of them based on racism.
Hey, look, bro, look, I'm with you 1,000%. And I love how we're in this country, we often say that race doesn't matter, that race shouldn't matter. But the very essence, the foundation of every institution, every system in this country is based upon what race you are. It makes no sense to me. It's like we're saying, oh no, it doesn't matter. But let me tell you, if we're talking about changing the conversation about race in this culture, in this country, and changing the culture of race in this country, then one, you got to admit that race has been at the root of everything that this country has done, right? Especially in its relationships to Black, Latino, Asian Americans, and all of the other constituents of this country. But then the second part of that is you can't say all of this other stuff, oh, it doesn't matter, when in fact, this is how the country got rich. This is how the country has been able to thrive, right? So now we're at this place, and I think it's an interesting place, and we're going to have to take a quick pause, but it's an interesting place to be in, because as much as the Supreme Court is debating whether affirmative action should continue to happen, there's the other side of what we're seeing with the reparations conversation. You know what I'm saying? Like, what is owed to Black people in this country? There's others that are standing up, other groups of other populations, other groups that are standing up. Hell, we just got out of celebrating, Asian Pacific Islander month. The conversation about race is becoming more and more bigger and bigger, and it's becoming so big that it's going to force this country. I truly believe this, folks. It's going to force the Supreme Court and other major institutions to confront it front and center. Otherwise, we playing games. We are playing games right now. Look, we got to take a quick pause. When we come forward, Sinead, I want to get more of your thoughts on this. Crew, I want to hear what you got to say. Post your comments on our YouTube page as we're streaming live right there. And stay tuned. We got more discussions about should race stay included in college admissions. Join me in the conversation and stay tuned. You're tuned into The Culture here on the Black Star Network.
Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
I'm Farajii Muhammad, live from LA. And this is The Culture. The Culture is a two-way conversation. You and me. We talk about the stories, politics, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. So join our community every day at 3 p.m. Eastern and let your voice be heard. Hey, we're all in this together. So let's talk about it and see what kind of trouble we can get into. It's The Culture, weekdays at 3, only on the Black Star Network.
When you talk about blackness and what happens in Black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in Black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind $100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Checks and money orders go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.
Folks, welcome back to the show. We have been talking about the idea and the policy of affirmative action as it relates to college admissions. And we're asking the question today, should colleges keep race or should race stay included in college admissions? Now, we've been chatting about this. as the Supreme Court is now deliberating a case around the idea of in the policy of affirmative action, but also given the fact that we're seeing more and more in this country that those who are on the back end or who are on the brunt of this situation are not getting any further along, that the gap between academic achievement, the gap of economic prosperity continues to widen each and every day. And so now we are at this point in this country where we're looking at, look, should there be given an extra boost or a little bit more of a push for those who don't fit into the category of being quote unquote a white American? We've been talking about this with our diversity, equity, inclusion specialist, Brother Sinedu Okorafor, and of course, crew, I want to hear from you. So make sure you join us in the discussion, post your comments on YouTube as we're streaming there. Brother Sinedu, let me just share with you very quickly something else that I saw in this piece. Let's go to quote number 2, Keenan, for this segment, where it talks about that many colleges already, Brother Sinedu, they're saying many colleges, especially selective ones, say race is one of many factors that officials can weigh when choosing which students get accepted. They say it is not a large influence, but may sometimes give an edge to underrepresented students in close decisions. Colleges defend the practice as a way to bring a wide mix of students to campus, saying racial diversity benefits all students. What do you say to that, Brother Sinedu? I mean, colleges are basically already saying, look, we already use this metric of race. This is a common practice. It's not something unknown or unusual. But at the end of the day, there still needs a lot of ground needs to cover. A lot of work needs to be done to kind of close the gap of academic achievement. So if the colleges are already doing it, do they need to do more of it? Like something needs to be, what needs to be handled from the college side of things?
I love this one visual that uses to describe equity versus equality. I think everybody wants equality because that's easier. And equity is what we need. Equality is I'm 6 foot, you're 5 foot, and I'm standing on one step and you're standing on one step. We're on the same equal step, but I'm already taller than you. Equity is giving you as many steps as you need to be at the same level as me. I think colleges must do more because doing more has to account for what you didn't do for decades. And I think this, kind of couples in the same conversation with reparations, et cetera, et cetera. It's the thing of you have to pay money and programs, whatever. You have to pay on what's owed and you have to adjust for inflation. Because we do that for everything else. And that is actually what we're asking for here. And we saw this same question come up in the HBCU equity federal lawsuit between the Coalition of Equity and Excellence in Higher Education versus the state of Maryland, which the coalition won, is because it wasn't enough to say that we were trying to be more equitable or that you want to be equal. You have to do something. That's how, back to my example of starting at the 100-meter versus 780 to do an 800-meter dash, it's not just about giving me more time, it's pushing me to the higher distance as well, if we're going to meet on equal footing. And I think that becomes the issue. I think there is a fear of giving Black people, immigrants, whomever, an equal fighting chance. It's just this fear of consuming, that folks will consume, that we will come and now consume the world and take people down. And it's not a new fear.
If it's a new fear, and I think that fear has been around for some time, Brother Sinedu, if this is a new fear, or rather if it is a fear, right? We're at a point in this country, I think that people just want to live their lives. People want to make sure that they can provide for their families. There's some sort of upward economic mobility. I don't think a lot of people's talking about revenge. Nobody is, you know what I'm saying? Like, I get the sentiment, but if you look at the nature of the Black liberation movement, Black struggle, civil rights movement, any type of human rights, movement in this country coming from Black or brown folks, it's not the space of we want to get back at you for what you've done to us. the tone has always been, let's just treat us equally and leave us alone. And you know, it's interesting that people create this other narrative around affirmative action as if it's taking away from something, when in fact, that's the least that you can do. I would think the least you could do for people who damn built this country. The least you could do is say, hey, let's give them a little bit more consideration, given the fact of institutions and policies, given the fact of systems. The least we could do is think about their application to our school, because most of these Ivy League schools or schools in general were built off of the ignorance, was built off of the financial gain that Black people generated. It blows me away. It blows me away, bro. I got like 30 seconds on this before we take our next pause, but I'm wondering, is it the messaging? Because I know in this piece that we're referencing, it talks about giving the underrepresented students an edge up, but this is not an edge. This is part of some level of justice. Like, if we built this country, if we gave our blood, sweat, and tears for this country, is it really an edge that we should be afforded quality and a quality educational experience? Is that really an edge?
It's not. And I think it's very simple in our short time. This is what I believe. I think it is easier to think about revenge because then you can justify your response to it than it is to actually just admit that what this is about rewriting a wrong. But then you have to tell yourself you're wrong first. And we're not interested in doing that.
Right. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Look, we got to take another pause. When we come back, more conversation. Stay with us, folks. It's The Culture here on the Black Star Network.
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol,
we're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate Black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear. Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
All right, folks, welcome back to the conversation here on the Culture on the Black Star Network. We've been talking about the issue, the policy, the big topic that's up for debate about affirmative action. And we've been asking the question, should colleges continue to use race as an indicator for college admissions? Now, we've been chatting with my brother Shinedu Wakorfor, who is a diversity, equity, inclusion specialist, and getting his take on what we're seeing right now based on a new poll that shows that more than half of Americans, 63%, say that the Supreme Court should not block colleges from considering race or ethnicity in their admission systems. I want to go to the crew. I want to bring my brother Shanadu back into the frame here. Brother Shanadu, let's talk a little bit more about this, because some members of the crew are saying some very interesting things. The Jima Boutique, you checked in and said, interestingly, white women and by extension, white families and Asians are the largest beneficiaries of affirmative action. Talk to us a little bit about that, because I've been kind of hearing that myself, Brother Shanadu, that white women, women in general, you have Asians, you have all groups of people from various ethnic backgrounds who seem to be getting the progress or the gains of affirmative action. Is that true, for one? And
yes.
Two, how do we expand the conversation to make sure that Black folks aren't lost in the mix?
It is true, especially in higher tertiary institutions, especially our Ivy Leagues. It is true, and it's always been true, because back to my example, even though we're all in the same minority boat, one minority is considered the model minority, and that's usually your Asians, but with specificity on Chinese and Japanese and that area of Asia. And it's probably because to the groups that are accepting folks in admissions, these people are low risk in many things. Oops, 1 second.
It's all good.
CNN, see, that's real life. CNN on the background. Sorry about that, Roland. Don't get mad at me.
Right. That's all good.
But the reality, and this is a very dangerous, but it's a great divisive tactic that they do, is because quote unquote Asian culture is not seen as the culture to be very reactive. They're quiet, they're together, they're the ones who take higher advantage of some of these programs where African Americans are minimal. And what you see there now is, it's now helping that community, but it's also now shaping the narrative that the folk who didn't get in, who are also minorities, are loud, rambunctious, this and that. And it's creating a larger division. I have seen this in multiple situations, and it also ends up turning into this also into the workplace as well, where Asians get lost between finding their voice. I'm using Asians as one example, I'm not generalizing.
Right.
And what ends up becoming funny is, it has been my experience that when that time comes, the first person that they look for are Black people. So it's interesting how culture has been weaponized when it comes to affirmative action, and how one culture has been more progressive than the other.
Yeah, bro, that's an excellent point. And you know what's interesting is, you're talking about this, I'm thinking through my mind, Brother Shanadu, like I don't hear the call for affirmative action, the call for diversity as strong as I do from other communities. Now, I might be wrong, but I just don't see, and you talking about Asian Americans being very quiet, you know, we're not, are those conversations happening? Is that a big deal? And based upon what you know, and what you're, you know, based upon the work that you do, are other communities upset about that? Because I feel like Black folks, we screaming out loud. We at the top of the mountain. We talking about it. But when it comes to women, when it comes to Latinos, when it comes to Asians, it doesn't seem like this is a huge part of their collective or communal conversations. I may be wrong. Am I wrong or right on this?
You're not wrong, but here's the thing. Because of that mindset of, again, model minority, they're quiet, they don't start trouble. Even if they are screaming up about this, you won't hear them because of how you view them. And this is also coming from me having a lot of colleagues who are of that community who explain it to me from their point of views, not their parents. And it's usually the parents are the ones doing the back room deals, if you will, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of these younger folks are now finding their footing and finding their voices to kind of speak against some of these things that are going on. So the conversations are happening, but again, it's not quote unquote socially loud enough for us to hear.
And maybe that's where we need to kind of switch gears on, because that's one of the things Tiana is brought up. She says, where are white women and Asians on the issues? We are always on the damn front lines. And I feel like we got to take the brunt. You know, we blaze the trail for everyone to benefit from the path that we tread, but we don't get the spoils of blazing that trail. We don't get the gain. You see what I'm saying? And I know that there cannot be no real conversation about diversity and equity and inclusion and affirmative action if Black people, and I'm not saying this as out of hatred, but I'm just saying this out of facts and history. You can't have a conversation about diversity. You can't have a conversation about equity and inclusion if Black people aren't at the center of the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Like what people have suffered more, have received less, and are still looking to be accepted by this system and institutions that are still contributing like Black Americans have been.
And
it's
still giving.
Go ahead, bro. What you said?
Still giving culture.
Still giving.
Everything.
Hey, bro, we still giving. We giving economically. We're giving our talents and skills to build up corporations and Wall Street. We're still giving socially with with the culture. Like, we're still giving. And again, this is not to throw no shade on any other group of people. I'm just looking at history and I'm looking at the facts of the situation. That when we have these conversations about diversity, it's like everybody else, but not understanding that you couldn't have a conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion if you can't address first the big Black elephant in the room, which is the state of Black America.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's the other part. Very quickly before we take our next pause, let me get this one from my sister Karen Connor. Karen said, as long as colleges and universities discriminate against Black applicants, affirmative action is necessary. It allows Black applicants to receive an equal education with their peers. As we close out on this part of the conversation, do you agree or disagree that this is the way to allow Black applicants to receive an equal education with their peers?
Yes. Yes. And
Right.
it's very simple. I like to just say this, remind people, let's take education out of it for a second. Look what it took to consider African Americans to be any part of the society, whether it be, when it was during the war, it's like, okay, we need them, so we'll consider them. We'll give you freedom if you do this. It's always had to be something else to give us something that God gave us all. So it's affirmative action is, again, it's not perfect. It is not perfect, but for right now, still, it is the only thing that actually holds our government, which has been predominantly white, to account to some of their erratic behaviors as it pertains to race, period.
Right. My brother, Sinedu, always a pleasure, man. I'm so happy and I'm so grateful for your time and your brilliance. Thank you so much for joining us for these discussions. And God willing, bro, we look forward to reconnecting with you sometime next week.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Brother Sinedu Okorafor, who is our diversity, equity, inclusion specialist, activist, or advocate, always bringing some great things for us to consider for the conversation. All right, folks, we got to take another quick pause. When I come forward, let me share with you another big cultural convo that I think that we should probably have. And I'm asking the question about the case of representation. How important really is it? Is it important for us to see ourselves in the spaces of whether it's media or in some type of political role or any type of social justice? How important is representation? We'll have that conversation. And also in the next segment, we'll also talk a little bit about what happened in New York City, where one Black woman got her wig ripped off her head by a lawyer. Yup, we'll talk about that case. Stay with us. The culture continues on the other side right here on the Black Star Network.
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds. There's
an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol.
We're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear. Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
All right, folks, welcome back to The Culture here on the Black Star Network. If you're just tuning in, make sure y'all do your due diligence and make sure you check out the conversations that we had in the first block of the show, checking in with my brother Sinedu as we talk about everything from the latest with the killing of the 14-year-old Cyrus Carmack-Belton to the talking about college admissions and affirmative action. Great discussions. And if you're just tuning in, we would love for you to check them out. So make sure you do that in the replay. And also make sure you stay tuned to us here on Black Star Network. Make sure you can find us on all Black Star Network. Go directly to our website today at blackstarnetwork.com. You can download the app for free on all of your devices. And more importantly, share the content, be a part of the movement of this Black digital media space. All right. So definitely check us out. And of course, you can find us on Amazon News. All right, folks, I want to have another conversation. This is something that's been on my mind. So, you know, we talked about The Little Mermaid. We talked about this idea of the importance of representation, and it kept being on my mind, crew. And this is something I wanted to just talk to you guys about. Let's process this for a minute, because this is a huge part of the culture, and I see it not just in media, but I see it in politics. I see it in every facet of life. There's always this great big emphasis on representation. And so I wanted to have this conversation with you where I call the case for representation. How important is it? How important is it for us to have a conversation or to be seen? I want y'all to think about this. How important is it for us to be seen in positions of power, to be seen in to be seen or considered for positions of influence, to be seen in the media in a positive light? Like, how important is it? And the reason that I wanted to have this discussion, because I had to ask myself this, especially in light of what we see with The Little Mermaid, and what we see coming out of Hollywood, what we're seeing coming out of the political spaces. Everybody's always putting this thing. I remember, of course, y'all remember when former President Barack Obama was elected, there was like this big discussion about it's important to have a Black president. Well, that might be different because of the nature of the job. But when we're talking about representation, there is a huge emphasis on making sure that people see Black people see our people in positions of power and influence. And I'm wondering, is that truly important? Is that truly important? If you grew up in a time where there were limited Black faces, whether on TV, in politics, in economic spaces, in positions of power and authority, CEOs, all of that stuff, did that make you feel less about yourself versus the time that we're living in now, where we have more Black people in different facets, different industries? There's still a lot of industries that we have not truly broken through yet. I'm thinking, for example, like the architecture industry, right? Or the engineering industry. Like, does this make a difference? Does this matter? Is this stuff really, really important? So I went to do a little bit of research on this, folks. And one of the things that I came across was this piece written by Dr. Kevin Nadal. Dr. Kevin Nadal is a distinguished professor of psychology at the City University of New York. He's the author of books including Microaggressions and Traumatic Stress. And he wrote this piece for psychologytoday.com, where he talks about why representation matters and why it's still not enough. I want y'all to take this walk with me, man, because I want us to think through this in light of all of the nuances that we see in our culture about having Black folk faces in different spaces. So one of the things he talks about his personal experience of growing up. He says, my reflections on growing up brown, queer, and Asian American. So he's kind of at the intersection of all of these different cultural places. He's part of the Asian American community. He's part of the LGBTQ community, the whole nine. But here's the thing that I wanted to lift up, and I want to get y'all take on this, folks. He said this. Let's quote one up, please, Keenan. He said that many Asian Americans and other people of color often struggle with their racial and ethnic identity development, with many citing how a lack of media representation negatively impacts their self-esteem and overall views of their racial or cultural groups. He said representation can serve as opportunities for minoritized people to find community support and validation. He said further representation can be helpful in reducing negative stereotypes about other groups initially discussed by psychologist Dr. Gordon Allport at Intergroup Contact Theory, where researchers believe that the more exposure or contact that people had to groups who were different from them, the less likely they would maintain prejudice. Very interesting thought, right? But I want us to kind of dive into this, and crew, I would love to get your take on this. Join us in the conversation. Post your thoughts on YouTube. But are we looking at this idea? Do we put too much emphasis on this idea of representation? That yes, representation can make us feel like we are part of a community. Representation can make us feel like we're quote unquote seen, right? But if you are trying to integrate yourself into a system or into a community of people who have not shown you that they value your presence, if you're trying to be seen, right, to inspire people to show you their value, do we put ourselves at a disadvantage by constantly hoping for someone to see our humanity, to see our significance, to see our value? Do we put ourselves in a position where we aren't taken seriously? Because it's one thing to see us in a position. If we think about The Little Mermaid, for example, it's one thing for Black girls to see a Black woman playing this iconic character that was originally written for, it was originally seen as a cartoon for one, but it was originally of a white girl. Does that change how Black girls should feel about themselves? I'm just asking. Does that change? Or does the representation have to be conditional, where we would love to be represented in positions of power in terms of political leadership, of course, like we had with our president, former President Barack Obama? That makes a difference to see a first Black president. But in positions of media, does that carry the same level of weight? I want to get your take on this, folks, because I'm struggling with this representation thing. Like logically, I'm like, okay, I see it. But then based on the conversation I was having with Brother Michael and Hotep the other day, earlier this week, it was like, we grew up, if you grew up in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and you did not see as many Black people on TV, you did not see as many Black folks in sports, or whatever the case may be, in those very outward cultural expressions, right? Did it take away from you? And part of me is that there's so much talk about representation that's only on the outside. What about the stuff on the inside? What about the substantive things, like making sure that people don't just see you, but they respect you because they see you as a human being? That people understand that, yes, you may look like one thing on the outside, but on the inside of you, you are a brilliant individual, that you can bring new ideas to the table. How do we reconcile those two realities? All right, I'm hoping I'm just laying this out for you because, again, I'm trying to process this is all in my head. So I would love to get what you got to say. Post your comments on our YouTube page. Matter of fact, let me do this. Let me take a quick pause. When we come forward, I want to hear from you directly, crew, and share with me your thoughts on this idea of representation, the case for representation. How important is it for us to be seen in various spaces? Join us in the conversation. Post your thoughts on YouTube, and let's continue to have the discussion, because I think this is a big cultural point that I don't want us to just overlook, to gloss over, to try to make it seem like it doesn't make a difference. When you're talking to your children, when you think about your own mind, body, and spirit, do you need to have other people in positions of power, influence, in popular culture? Do you need to see yourself in that? Do you need to see yourself? Join us in the conversation. And of course, stay tuned. We'll continue the discussion on the other side here on The Culture on the Black Star Network.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
I'm Farajii Muhammad, live from LA, and this is The Culture. The Culture is a two-way conversation, you and me. We talk about the stories, politics, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. So join our community every day at 3 p.m. Eastern and let your voice be heard. Hey, we're all in this together, so let's talk about it and see what kind of trouble we can get into. It's The Culture, weekdays at 3, only on the Black Star Network.
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol,
we're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear. When you talk about blackness and what happens in black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Check some money orders. Go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland@RolandSMartin.com.
All right, folks, welcome back to the culture here on the Black Star Network. All right, crew, y'all are talking on YouTube right now, and I'm loving the conversations, the conversation that's happening around this issue of representation. I have been dealing with this. I'm telling you, folks, the case of representation, how important it is the question that we are posing to you, because I personally have been kind of challenged by this idea that we need to be seen, we need to have representation. And I'm wondering, is this conditional? Is this something that we might need to have in one area, may not need to have in another area? Or does it just mean across the board? Or if there is no representation, does that take away the momentum for Black folks in this country in particular, and maybe other folks? Let's say you could talk about Latino Americans or Asian Americans. I mean, when you don't see marginalized faces, whether it's coming from Hollywood or from any other space, does that make you feel less about yourself? And I'm talking about in 2023, folks. I'm not talking about in 1993. I'm talking about in 2023. If your children don't see themselves on TV, if they don't see themselves in the music. Now, it's another thing, again, that's why I said this is conditional, I think, that we need to learn about Black people in history. You got to, just as much as you talk about George Washington, just as much as you talk about Abraham Lincoln, just as much as you talk about the great inventors on that side, you got to talk about the great contributions. That's one thing. That's not representation. That's beyond what's seen. That is actually what is. That is us paying homage to those who have made our lives better, right? But for this conversation about being seen, being represented in these different spaces, we need to be represented. We need to be at the table. I'm wondering, how important is it, given the fact that we are represented in a lot of different spaces? We are at the table. We are on the screens. But is it making a big difference in how you see yourself and how other people see us? All right, let me go to you, crew, because so many of you are checking in. My man, Davey Floater, you kicking us off on this conversation today. You said, oh, that's an easy one, Farajii. You said representation under capitalism is almost meaningless. The system of endless exploitation is unthreatened, and the representatives will fold under pressure. Wow. Almost meaningless. You also said, Davey, you said, I think The Little Mermaid is a different conversation than the political representation, to be honest. I agree. That's why I say there might be some levels of representation. There might be some levels of representation. Here's why this got under my skin, and Davey, I appreciate you for bringing this up. This got under my skin. I remember, I had a couple of conversations. One is I had my conversation with one of my best friends, and he talked about he works in the entertainment space and everything. And he said, bro, everything that you see coming out of Hollywood is curated. There's no such thing as really organic. For example, we see the Little Mermaid, right? So there was all that hoopla about that. The new movie, The Color Purple, produced with the backing of Oprah Winfrey, Quincy Jones, and Steven Spielberg. will be coming out in theaters in December, right? I think Christmas Day of this year. And so we're going to see, and Halle Bailey is in that project as well, and a lot of other voices, Fantasia. And black folks are probably going to flock to the theater. Not to say that the story is terrible and all of that, but I'm just saying, like, you can almost kind of bet your bottom dollar, like, which projects, which film is going to bring in the black audiences. Black folks are going to flock to the theater to see Color Purple, to see this nuanced version of the story. But does it take our narrative to the next level? That's what I'm talking about, folks. And again, I'm going back and forth in my mind around this. So does it take it to the next level? David, you said no, considering the fact that we're living in a capitalistic society. That at the end of the day, that none of that is as important than what we can bring to the society, what our dollars can bring, right? All right. I hear you, Davey, loud and clear. All right, let me go to some more of what y'all have to say. And crew, y'all are just bringing it. And I truly, truly appreciate you. Marcus Jackson, my brother. Marcus, good to hear from you. You said it's not okay just to be seen. When the images and representation is demeaning and negative, the representation must be positive because people will aspire to be what they see, good or bad. Here's the thing. And Marcus, I agree with you wholeheartedly, bro. Here's the thing. As adults, as black adults in this country, what inspires you? I want y'all to hear me on this. What is the inspiration? Because as black adults, like I say, if you're 30, 40, 50, 60 years old, 70 years old, you've seen it all, right? We've been through this up and down in terms of history. Does that mean anything? What's the inspiration for you to stay informed? What's the inspiration for you to stay conscious? There's something there. And I'm wondering, and Marcus, you bringing this up, that the representation must be positive, which I totally agree with. But same thing, though. We also have seen black people in political spaces who have done negative things. They were good for the moment, bad for the larger period, for the outcome, right? We have seen this. But what inspires black adults? For us in Black America, what inspires us? Is it to be seen or is it to be felt? I'm going to say that again. Is it to be seen or is it to be felt? To be seen is one thing. To be felt is another. When I was listening to my brother Sinead early in the conversation, he talks about the Asian American community. The Asian American community, if people were to look at the plight of the Asian American and the plight of black people in this country, they would say, man, the Asian American seems to be getting a little further along, not considering all of the other stuff historically that has happened to black folks in this country. But Asian Americans seem to have their presence is felt in cities across the country, from Los Angeles to New York. There's a Koreatown, their presence is felt in some way, shape, or form. So we have to ask, and I'm wondering, that's why I'm asking this question, throwing out a lot of questions for us, folks. But that's why I'm asking it, as black adults in this country, how important is representation? Do we want to just be seen or we want to be felt? Karen Connor, you said, I've raised my children to be the best and command respect. We don't need validation from another human being. We strive to be a blessing to others with our wisdom, knowledge, and ability. Absolutely. Excuse me. Absolutely. Validation. And who, Karen, for you, and I know this is I think I know the answer to the question I'm opposed to you, Karen, but who teaches the children that they don't need to be validated? And that's why I'm pointing back to the piece around the Little Mermaid and these other like moments that we have in our culture of quote unquote representation. It's because, do we want Hollywood? Does Hollywood have to validate our worth? Or should we get into a space where we validate our own selves? Whether the Little Mermaid was white or black, does that take away from the beauty, the magic, the value of black girls? No. It really doesn't. Not to me, not in that proper context. Now, whether Barack Obama was president of the United States, does that mean that we still are not politically astute? Oh, not to me. Am I right or wrong on this? Folks, join me in the conversation. Karen, I love it. You are not a victim. You said, since representation matters so much, I'm sure everyone is excited that Senator Tim Scott is running for president, right? Again, great point. You are not a victim. Great point. Senator Tim Scott, a black Republican, black, one of the few, I think he's like the only one or two black senators in the United States Congress. He's seen there is representation, but so in the case of a Tim Scott, who is in a position of power, influence, a position that what he decides affects the lives of other people, is that representation what we should be striving for? Some people say we need to have representation in the GOP, right? Okay. But what if the GOP in its fundamental tenets and philosophy of how they see the world and how they govern, what if none of that changes, but we are there? Wouldn't that just make us mannequins of the GOP, of the Republican Party? See, I don't want us to get into, and I got to take another pause, but I don't want us to get into a space where there's so much emphasis on being seen that there's no emphasis on what's behind the image. Folks, I got to take another quick pause. When we come forward, more conversation about this, and let me know if I'm off track on any of this. I would love to hear what you got to say. We're talking about the case for representation. How important is it? Stay with me. You're tuned into The Culture here on the Black Star Network.
I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show, Get Wealthy, focuses on the things that your financial advisor and bank isn't telling you, but you absolutely need to know. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
All right, folks, welcome back, crew, to The Culture here on the Black Star Network. Having a great conversation, a little fireside chat with you about this idea, the case for representation. How important is it is the big question we're posing to you. And so many of you have some great thoughts, whether it's whether it's good or not good. But the conversation is so robust on our YouTube channel as we're streaming live there, that folks, I want you to join us. Make sure you do so. But let me just share more of what you have to say around this issue. Corinna, my sister, you said my parents always had black newspapers and Essence and Ebony magazines, so that my moms loved those magazines. Excellent. She said Corinna, you said they only bought me black dolls, including Barbies and a black Cabbage Patch doll. I'm thankful to my parents for that. Okay, yeah. So that level of representation of what we see with the with seeing images of black excellence, right? Because that's what Essence and Ebony always showcase. They showcase us looking regal and royal. They showcase us in the bright light, and you know, it made us look beautiful. So seeing that. Now, Corinna, I'm not going to assume how old you are. But just to say that level of exposure at that time, say 25, 30 years ago, made a difference. In 2023, we're in a different cultural space. If there has to be a quote unquote an effort, a concerted effort to include Black folks, Latino folks, any other quote unquote marginalized community in popular culture and in popular spaces, then that's the real problem. That's the problem. But to get that exposure 30 years ago, that was revolutionary, right? That when we were seeing, and of course I'm not this old, but in the 60s and 70s, I can only imagine if you're having a whole mantra of I'm Black, I'm proud, how that shook up the psyche of Black folks, right? That's how a lot of the movement, the Black Power movement, came to being, because there was a different thought that Black people in this country grabbed hold on as a result of the years of oppression, as a result of what we weren't able to accomplish through the civil rights movement. Now there was more of a revolutionary spirit that was taking hold of Black folks, especially within the hoods and the ghettos of the country, right? That Black men and Black women started to gravitate to this idea that instead of the systems making me want to hate myself, I'm going to do the revolutionary act of loving myself and loving my brother, loving my sister, loving my people, at regardless of whom or what. That's a revolutionary act. A revolutionary act. But it was an act that came out of a space of saying we did not see enough of, we're seeing or we're experiencing some level of oppression and tyranny from the system. Now, back in that time, y'all remember back in the day when we had blaxploitation movies, where we saw some of the great Black ones such as like Pam Grier and other artists, actors and actresses that have come out of that space, right? But one of the things that I've learned, for example, with blaxploitation, there are a number of great documentaries like on Netflix and other spaces that talks about this. Melvin Van Peebles, the great Melvin Van Peebles, and many others who took what the experiences of Black folks were in the country at that time, put it on film, added some nuances to that, and made us not just the butlers and the servants, but made us the superheroes, sometimes the gangsters and the pimps. But there was certain type of code that we would abide by. It was a very, very interesting space. That blaxploitation was not to exploit us, but it was to show us in a different light. Now, that's according to the Hollywood context. So that's important. But is it so important now in 2023 that we need to be seen? Can't we just see ourselves, look in the mirror and just see ourselves and find some beauty in ourselves? Or do we still need the assistance of other people outside of ourselves to validate who we are? Alana, you checked in and said representation absolutely matters. You see healthy Black families in media. We emulate that now. All we know is BMF and power. Well, we were exposed to the Cosby Show. That was one of the biggest cultural projects of our generation. That kicked us off. When you saw, and we can talk about the beauty of the Cosby Show all day, but that set a new precedent, right? For the Cosby Show. That was an 80s show, Black family, Black excellence, with very high level positions, a doctor and lawyer, and then you had art enthusiasts, and it's just a lot of history and culture. And that's one of the great things that Bill Cosby was able to offer to the culture, was this expression. But now we're looking at that. We've seen certain groups, certain shows like Family Matters and other shows. They have been, especially in the early 90s, y'all remember those shows, Living Single, and all of these early shows that showed a different side of Black folks. But again, if you also saw in the early 90s, y'all remember during that time that there were movies like Menace to Society, Boys in the Hood, that kind of juxtaposed one view, one sense of representation to show us the other side. And it was also in the early 90s that we were involved in a much more violent culture. So I'm personally, and I'm bringing this all up because I'm thinking this thing through. I'm thinking about, listening to what y'all have to say, crew, trying to figure out, like, how do we find some common ground here? How do we get to a place where we don't have to look to people outside of us to show us our value and our worth? All right, let me take this a couple more. I hope y'all enjoying this conversation as much as I'm having, because I think it's beautiful for us to even talk about this. Let me see here. Brother Solomon, you said representation is only as important as the action that follows. Come on. I don't want to be represented, and I got to take another pause, but I don't want representation without no substance. Brother Solomon, I think you hear me loud and clear, bro. I don't want representation with no substance. I'm personally tired of folks saying, "Oh man, it's good for the representation." Oh, okay, all right, but is that going to lead to something substantive? Is that going to lead to some real change? Because I'm tired of window dressing, folks. I'm personally tired of window dressing. I'm personally tired of us being on the forefront of the culture and for to make it look like progress is being made, but then behind the scenes, it's still the good old boy network. It's still, the same type of stuff that we've been battling for the past 40 and 50 years. That's not change. That's not progress to me. That's just putting us out there on the front to cover the wicked deeds of those behind us. I'm tired of it. Look, I got to take another pause. When we come back, more conversation about this. Stay with us. It's The Culture here on the Black Star Network.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for a Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
All right, folks, welcome back to the show. Such a great discussion that I'm having with you, talking about the case for representation. How important is it? And I want to get to this final point in a minute, dealing with the situation in New York City. But I'm reading what you have been talking about in our YouTube chat, and I see that there are so many different variations, and I think that this is the type of conversation that we should be having. It's a much more softer conversation. It's not about hardcore news and politics and what's going on with our health and well-being, but it speaks volumes. This is like one of the big parts of our culture that we can't just overlook. It will fix itself. We have to be intentional about the culture that we want to embrace, the culture that we want to experience. That's what I'm learning. Since doing this show and since having these conversations, it's like we need to be intentional, because the thing that's being attacked, whether you're talking about in the school system, you're talking about what DeSantis is doing, what any other group is doing, the thing that's really being attacked is the culture. is how we go about interacting with one another, how we go about building relationships with one another, how we go about just celebrating each other, celebrating ourselves and celebrating each other. This is what's really under attack. It's our culture. And if we aren't intentional about the culture, if we aren't aware of the different nuances of the culture, if we aren't aware of the fact that sometimes there are parts of our culture that we have put into motion, but then there are other parts of our culture that where we are being pulled into motion by other people, other institutions, other forces. If we don't recognize that, then we can't get to a place where the culture becomes a true expression of who we are. I think that the current culture that we're living is a hybrid of what we like, what we want, what we, how we are, and along with what others like, what others want, and how they see us. Does that make sense to you? That there's this hybrid. And it's nothing wrong with that because we live among other people. And so it is good that we are open to other people, that we get the experiences. As Black folks in this country, some of us individually, we have family members that are from all over the globe, whether it's from Europe, whether it's from the Caribbean islands, whether it's from the continent of Africa, it doesn't matter. So the culture should be this blending of things, but at the end of the day, it should be an authentic expression. And I think that's what we're fighting against. When I've been reading about the culture wars in this country, it's like, what are we really at war with? Are we at war with ourselves? I think so in some cases. But we're also at war with the fabricated ways that institutions have created this sense of collectivism. For example, social media, right? Social media has its own culture. Social media has also determined what the guidelines are about how we engage one another, how we interact, how we respond to one another, how we should see one another, right? But guess what? It's all within the confines and within the boundaries of a social media system that was determined by a small group of people who says that this is important, this is not important, this is popular, this is not popular. And so this conversation is a way for us to think about how do we not just take back America? No, how do we get a handle on the culture and become more cognizant about the impact that the culture has made on how we see ourselves, how we think, and how we interact with other people? All right, let me say something. Nicole, you checked in and said we already have everything we need for Black representation. We have Black actors, Black directors, Black crews, Black producers. We just need to do it. But guess what? When we do it, it depends on how, and I agree with you in every step of the way, Nicole. When we do that, though, it still has to come on a platform. It depends on the platform that we show that level of artistry. You can be on a small cable network, or you could be supported and have the resources of a major studio. If you're on a small platform, then you want to get your message out to the masses of people, then you're going to have to figure out how to do that. You may have to tweak some things for your next project. That's one of the big things. And I'm glad you brought that up, Nicole, because it makes me think about Black Panther being written by Ryan Coogler, directed by Ryan Coogler. You got the producers, but he had the backing of a major studio, right? He had the backing of Marvel. So boom, he was able to tell his story, and it resonated with us. It resonated with us in spite of the fact that there were people who did not want to see this project come into fruition. And it resonated, and it made a lot of money. And some people would even go as far as to say that because it made so much money, that this is a sign that that we're finally being accepted, right? It depends. It depends. So I can understand the thinking behind that. But our culture should not be for sale. Our history should not be for sale. We should not have to sacrifice all of that to just simply be seen as a human being, just to simply be seen as valuable. And that's unfortunately a part of, I think, more of a capitalism more than anything else, is that capitalism will make you sell yourself. You become this commodity versus you being this human. All right, let me go to, and you know, y'all got me going, and I got to close out this show. I got to close out today's show, but I really appreciate that, and we'll get to the situation that happened in New York some other day. We'll try to get to it tomorrow or something, but I really wanted just to have this one-on-one with y'all, because this thing has been on my mind since Little Mermaid came out, since I'm reading more stuff. I'm like, man, what do we do with this idea of representation? So I want to give a big shout out to all of y'all, the crew, for having this conversation with me and just indulge with me, just to take this walk for us to think about this thing. Because at the end of the day, folks, this stuff is the stuff that makes the culture. This stuff is what matters the most. So you can certainly continue to support us. You can see, if you, like, for example, I saw Lana, you said representation matters. That's why you tuned into the Black Star Network. You're absolutely correct. In the case of Black Star, yes, we need to have more Black platforms that speaks about the issues that gonna have those conversations. You're absolutely right, especially when you're talking about telling the stories of a people whose stories are often distorted or not told at all. So Black Star Network plays a huge critical role in that process. So with that being said, I thank each and every one of you for tuning in. Look, do your due diligence. If you enjoyed the conversation that we've been having over this past few minutes and throughout the whole show, go to our website. Check us out at blackstarnetwork.com, blackstarnetwork.com. We would love to have you as a supporter of the work that we're doing. We're looking for financial support. We also want you to share the comment, share the content, and download the app for free. You can go to blackstarnetwork.com. You can download it for free on all of your devices, whether it's your phone, your tablet, your laptop, your desktop, wherever you are. You can download it for free and stay tuned to the conversations that we have. There it is right there. There's our website, blackstarnetwork.com. We are streaming live on YouTube, YouTube, and of course on Amazon News. And look at that. There you go. Who's that guy? That will pop up. So we look forward to your support of the work that we're doing, having these conversations, because your support means everything to us. So just check us out at blackstarnetwork.com. Also follow us on social media at Black Star Network on Instagram and Twitter. And while you're there on social media, make sure you do your due diligence and follow me. You can find me at The Real Farajii on Instagram and at Farajii on Twitter. I would love to connect with you and love to continue to build with you. And let's continue to talk about various elements of this culture that we do have the power to change, folks. Please, let's not get into a space that the culture is outside of us. We are the culture. We make the culture. We determine what the culture is. If the culture goes a little bit left or culture goes a little bit right, let's talk about it, see if we can find a consensus to bring it back into the middle. But most importantly, let's not forget, folks, that we are the culture. All right, stay tuned. Up next is Roland Martin Unfiltered, coming at you at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But I thank my dynamic team. I thank Maddie. I thank my man Keenan. Thank Joel. Thank Shannon. And I thank my great control room. Make sure y'all continue to support us. And as always, never be afraid to challenge what's wrong. Stand for what's right while being yourself in the process. And God willing, we will reconnect with you tomorrow for another exciting edition of The Culture, right here, exclusively here, only here on the Black Star Network. Talk to you soon. Peace.